All right, well, this will be short and sweet, but if you read Anarupa Ganguly's bio in the meeting invitation, you'll see that she's got some pretty impressive credentials, bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT. She also has a master's in curriculum and instruction from Boston University, has been a physics and math teacher, served in leadership positions in both public and charter school systems, and was awarded an NSF grant. But what I'm most impressed with when I met Anarupa last year was really her passion for students and learning, math and science, and particularly working with students in underserved populations. So was super excited when I sent her an email and she said, yes, I will speak to the Ohio Math and Science Coalition. So with that, I am just going to turn it over. Happy to see you, Anarupa, and glad you made a safe trip this morning and got to where you needed to be.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and apologies to the entire group for my delay. Driving across Texas is always a bit of a question and uncertainty, but I'm glad to be here. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Anarupa Ganguly. I'm the founder of an initiative called Prisms, and really honored to be here to share a little bit more about my learnings and research working in math ed for numerous years, and looking at new frontiers in technology that really allow us to begin to fundamentally change how our children grasp and retain foundational mathematics over time. That has been the root of fragility for a long time. So to do so, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and you all can let me know if you can see what I can see. Just one moment. Okay, so let's see. Okay, and then so. Okay. Are you able to, Michelle, are you seeing a full screen or no? Is it like a little piece?
I'm seeing the presenter's view, so I can see your slide and then the next slide coming up. That's
okay,
good.
Let's not do that then. Yeah. Okay. Let's just do it like this. And the other question that I have is, I'm at the school district right now, and the Wi-Fi has been a little bit spotty. Are you able to hear my is my video coming in through okay?
I'm okay with
yeah. And you are being recorded.
Excellent. If at any point what I might do is just stop my video while I'm kind of going through some of the presentation, in case just let me know if the audio starts to skip. I'll stop my video. So before getting started on what I'm really excited to share with you about with respect to this new medium that we have to fundamentally change how people learn, I did want to just give a little bit more color around my background and what's brought me here, as my life experiences have had profound impact on what I build and for whom. So my journey with STEM education reform very much started as a student. I studied electrical engineering and computer science at MIT, and my freshman year, about 24% of my department were women. More than 50% dropped out while I was in college, and about 10% of us graduated my senior year. And I stayed on for my graduate work there, and it was a total disappearing act. Had you looked at my graduate courses, you would say there isn't a single woman in the K-12 American system, which is patently false. So as I kind of began to get maniacally obsessed with what's happening at the K-12 math and science level, such that for our most advantaged students, these are students who had 5s on their APs, 1590s on their SATs, for that demographic, you see such egregious drop-offs. So what could potentially be happening for our communities with far less access to opportunity? So to understand this, I became a high school teacher. I taught 9th grade Algebra 1 and 11th grade Algebra 2 and 9th and 11th grade physics in the Boston Public Schools. Boston's about a medium-sized district, about 55,000 kids, 125 schools. After I left the classroom, I was the director of 6-12 and then K-12 math in Boston, really focused on curriculum and teacher professional learning. Then I moved over to New York City. New York City is a little bit bigger. I had about 1.2 million kids and 1,800 schools under my jurisdiction. And then most recently, I was a dean of math and engineering at Success Academies, which is one of the highest performing charters in the US. And what I learned kind of working across a lot of these very, very different schooling systems, small, medium title, large title, non-title, is that we don't have the tools to close these learning gaps at scale, full stop. And I say that with a very high level of conviction. One of the things
To
that—
situate us in a quick overview of the evolution of educational
Oh, no.
technology over time.
What was that? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I have no idea what that was. But one of the things that, I guess if I go to the slide, it's going to start.
To situate us
Okay.
in a quick
That's so bizarre. So I will skip that. I will skip that slide. What I will narrate about it though is that when I say that we don't have the tools, I want to give us a quick overview of the different generations of ed tech tools that permeated our school system and kind of where we are today. Because it's not that any one of those generations of technology were good or bad. They all played a role, but it kind of tells the story of technology over time. So I kind of call them as like EdTech 1.0. EdTech 1.0 was just getting base infrastructure in. So, obviously hardware, student information systems. It was kind of setting up the infrastructure for the digitization of student learning, student data, and student systems. Then you had EdTech 2.0, which was beginning to digitize learning methodologies. So you began to get online lecture libraries, kind of like these like drill and kill EdTech tools. You began to get formative assessments, gamified, again, in the context of math, like gamified ways to kind of get kids to continue to work on problem sets, but it was all digitizing the existing methodologies of learning math. EdTech 3.0, as I like to call it, is okay, we have infrastructure in schools, great. We have we've now began to digitize through kind of, again, online lecture libraries, online assessments. Now we have the opportunity in EdTech 3.0, as I call it, to begin to digitize high quality pedagogy, because that has not been done yet. And the reason why it hadn't been done yet is because we didn't have the technologies afforded to us to scale high quality pedagogy until more recently with advances in virtual reality, where natural interfaces and more natural ways of interacting with the world were now possible through tech. With the previous generation of tech, everything was modulated through a keyboard and a mouse, and kids were forced to look at a small black screen. I always tell my mother, I'm like, it's going to be amazing. One day we're going to look back and say, can you imagine there were generations of children where we made them sit down and stare at a small black screen, and we called that learning. And now it's really, we're in a place where with AR and VR, we're able to begin to digitize much more human and humanistic ways of sense making of the world, besides kind of staring at 2D screens. So kind of what has afforded that? One of the biggest things has been the availability of new hardware. So in terms of what virtual reality hardware afforded us today versus 5 years ago, is now with VR headsets, children are really able to suspend disbelief and experience things in the first person. Thus far, most of the learning experience for kids has been someone else narrating, whether it's a video, whether it's a teacher. It's very rarely been first-person experiences that have been scalable. Now, of course, you have internships and you have apprenticeships, but that's a small minority of students. The vast majority have not been trained through first-person experiences. The second thing is just the level of body interactions that are now available. So as I mentioned before, the main interaction system of a computing device of between the 1970s and through the early 2000s was staring at a screen. Now we have the ability to interact, to grab, touch. I'm going to kind of get more into, why this is so important, but it's a very, very different level of interactivity with the environment. We also have much higher levels of comfort now. VR hardware for a long time was very bulky. You had like an umbilical cord that was stuck to a bulky piece of hardware. You couldn't move around too much. There was nausea, there was dizziness. The graphics, the product art fidelity was very low. Just everything felt not great. So we had to kind of continue to build the software and the hardware apparatus for this hardware to feel comfortable and natural for anybody. And because there's no bulky umbilical cord, it's mobile. And what that opens up is movement. So again, there's been a pervasive culture of desks and tables and people sitting, when in fact, all the research shows that why is it that when we prepare for an interview, they say, go stand up in a bathroom, because standing up gives you agency. Standing gives you power. And when you are for such a large period of your life, like seated and subservient, the way in which you view your contribution to the world also is reflective of that. So, that mobility, which feels ostensibly like, okay, Anarupa, cool, they can kind of get up. It has like huge impacts, which we're going to get into. And the other piece of the virtual reality hardware that now puts us in what I'm calling EdTech 3.0, i.e., a world in which we begin to scale best practice pedagogies through technology, is that it's affordable. So, these headsets used to cost anywhere between like, $1,000, $1,500. Most recently, it had come down to $700, $800. Now it's in the $300 to $400 range. So it's far more accessible without diminishing quality. VR is also very much on the cusp of mass adoption. We're now beginning to see the sales of headsets. So although it's still very much an institutional focus for virtual reality, we haven't really seen kind of the mass adoption in consumer as of yet. We're kind of going in that direction while cost continues to fall and people continue to buy and find ways to really create valuable use cases for a new medium. Something I always say is, I don't know if you all have watched a lot of the first movies that were ever created. And what I found really fascinating is with a new medium, artists and creators, they tend to copy all the design of the old medium. So if you look at the first films, they looked like plays. They didn't look like films. And or as we think about them today. And what began to happen was as people began to discover more and more and more affordances of a new medium, the interaction systems and the storytelling began to really evolve. So I say that because VR is at the beginning, which means that in the first VR experiences, a lot of them were kind of like 360 videos, which were like, because the previous medium were videos. And what people tended to do was, let's just put video in VR, rather than saying, what does VR afford us that is totally different from video? And how do we begin to scale those experiences? Because of the power of, and again, I'm giving you a very, very quick primer, and then we're going to get into the main topic of our time today, which is around learning design and how do you create efficacious learning design, and some of the early research we've been doing with the NSF and the NIH. But I wanted to kind of paint a picture of just where we are vis-a-vis the hardware and the different movements. And you all have lived through this. I know I lived through it. I was a teacher during the laptop cart revolution. And I never could conceive 15 years ago when I was a teacher, or however long ago it was at this point, that public schools would be issuing Chromebooks or laptops or iPads, or every district has a different vendor of preference, but there would be a one-to-one device movement. And it's really given me the confidence that VR is going to be the next one-to-one device, again, because of the learning methodologies that it'll afford. And so it's kind of the role of the education community right now to really modulate the medium for it to be pedagogically effective versus yet another gamification tool, which is what most edtech tools sadly had become. In terms of just like the potential, before I started Prisms, I did a ton of research on what use cases were already in the market. And so the most of the applications were really in the corporate training and higher ed. So also VR is an organization that brought VR to surgical training, and they found huge increases in procedural tasks. So there's a 230% increase in surgical performance, 20% increase in task completion, about a 40% accuracy rate in terms of just more things getting completed correctly. And then you had similarly with Striver VR, Walmart, and then PwC were started to use for soft skill training, customer success training. And not only was there just like efficacy in that, they were outperforming, because when you do something with your body and rather than kind of watching someone else do it, you're going to learn faster, right? That feels like very, very obvious. And so when I began to see this being applied pretty effectively in the corporate sector, that's when I realized in 2019, there are huge implications for education, and we have to start building, and we have to start building fast. One of the important things that kind of very early on, I kind of now connecting back to my personal story, what I learned is the top indicator of success in post-secondary STEM is your ability to think spatially and rotate 3D objects in your mind. It's the number one indicator in engineering, the physical sciences, maths, and CS. It's obviously it's a much kind of lower on the totem pole for people that go on to be successful in the humanities. It is not a cognitive process that is used in the same manner. And so the reason why VR, there's such a big case for VR to teach math and science in particular versus other subject matter is that the extent to which you have to be able to think spatially, which again, a 2D surface just doesn't allow you to do, is like table stakes to contribute to the mathematical sciences. And so what I began to kind of discover is that not only is the number one indicator in STEM your ability to think spatially, but the number two indicator is your ability to abstract. And all I mean by that is your ability to experience things in your world through perceptually, and then ascribe language, notation, and conventions, and create mathematical models of things that you experienced in your life. And so I'm kind of looking at all of this going, okay, there must be people who discovered this before we started thinking about it. And the person who was most articulate about this was Albert Einstein. Whenever he was asked about his mathematical thinking, he always said, my thinking is muscular. There's this beautiful vignette he writes when he could conceive of E is equal to MC squared. He was riding a bike and he says, had I not been in motion, the relationships between those quantities would have never come into fruition. And he's, of course, most famous for saying, my learning is experiential. You tell me anything, I'm going to forget it. What Einstein kind of told the world through his stories and anecdotally, learning science is very much validated empirically. So we now know that the majority of our brain is wired for experiential learning. So learning by our senses, seeing, doing, movement, and touch. And so now kind of really coming to learning design, I'm trying to fly through some like basic context stuff. So again, we can kind of focus on the meat of the conversation. But where we are right now is we know that the top indicators are spatial reasoning. We know the top indicators are your ability to abstract, and that we reason through our five senses, i.e. seeing, doing, moving, and touch. And yet the hundreds and hundreds of tools across my desk when I was a director of math didn't exploit these facts. So kind of what I want to take you through is, how do our children today learn Achilles heel subjects like Algebra 1? Within Algebra 1, I'm going to take you through an example for exponential functions, such that when I show you the types of VR designs that are possible, you'll get a really good understanding of what this new technology is capable of and why it's worthwhile to apply it in this manner. So today, to learn a concept like exponential functions, kids begin by memorizing the form of an equation. This equation is typically divorced from any sort of personal relevance or meaning. When I was a teacher, I would tell like, hey, like epidemiologists use it here. And I would like kind of do cartwheels in front of the room, but it didn't matter. It was divorced from my kids' day-to-day. I was telling them about my life. It wasn't their life. It wasn't anything that they had perceived or seen. They then begin to memorize properties about that construct. So they'll start saying things like the outputs have a common factor. They then begin to memorize if-then statements. If you see one person, that means in your equation, in your general form, A is equal to 1. If you see a growth rate of 5, that means B is equal to 5. And then they run that procedure over and over and over again. So our kids are leaving with reflexes, as evidenced by the next unit assessment or the end of, or potentially the end of your assessment, but they're leaving with no understanding or intuition. And kind of what this has led to is about 70% of US 8th graders are not proficient in math, as you all well know. And then 28% of high school seniors opt into STEM. More than 50% drop out once they get there. So the US is graduating about 14% of the STEM economy that makes up more than double of the jobs. So the way that, you know, we really came to understand the problem is that existing tools are not aligned to how we learn best. And we repeatedly digitized a learning mechanism, this one, that didn't work for most kids. And going back to EdTech 2.0, we created, I can't say any particular product, and I'm not here to take anyone down, but we basically created online lectures. We created more and more videos just for people to sit here and watch like over and over again. We created tons of drill and kill tools. Like one question, if you get it right, then another question. Let's make the kid click on hints over and over again. Like we just kept digitizing methodologies that were the same brick and mortar model that was only helping about 20% of the population. So I started an organization called Prisms to build a new spatial learning design that is a part of this EdTech 3.0 group of people in the world right now that are saying computing devices have failed, technology has failed to scale best practice pedagogies. The math and science outcomes in the United States have been stagnant over the past 40 years. There are less minority engineers and computer scientists today than there were 2 decades ago. So something's very, very broken in terms of how we have attempted to solve these problems. And virtual reality really affords us a new set of design languages and new set of design tools to write a new chapter of how people learn these concepts. So on that idea of, okay, exponential functions, this is how kids learn it. What's a new way that it could be learned using virtual reality? So the first module we built was, unfortunately, we were born during the pandemic. So I wanted to give students and their teachers a way to talk about what they were seeing in the world. And so we built for mobile VR. And so students put their headsets on and they are transported to a world. What's interesting about this world is they are the leading actor in that world. And so in this particular story, you're in a food hall and you're buying your food, you're taking in the environment, and there's a mayor's announcement. And the mayor says there's an alarming growth rate of this unknown flu or virus or whatever. Stay safe. Kids then get the power on their watch to go back in time and see, they're observing like, oh, I remember she had sneezed. I didn't realize she had gotten it. So you get to kind of go back in time and see how the virus was spreading when you were unaware. She's like, oh, she sneezed on her friend. Her friend could have gotten it. And then her friend walked back and another 4 people could have gotten it. So it's a physical understanding of multiplicative growth, not an intellectual one. Students then accept a mission. How many weeks until the hospitals in your community are going to reach capacity? And it's through that question, kids connect that physical understanding to 3D simulations outside their body. It's the first definition of abstraction. People had hair, eyes, clothes in the food hall. They then become sprites in a data visualization. They then connect that to tactile data visualization tools from which they create tables and charts to discern patterns, to create the equation y is equal to 5 to the x, to then generalize to y is equal to ab to the x. So that through line of going from physicality to simulation, to 3D data visualization, to charts and tables, which begin to get into 2D representations of thought, to equations and the general form is highly scalable. It's like all of secondary math and science. So what we began to do was with our NSF, during our NSF phase 1 research, and then we got our NSF phase 2 to continue our R&D, we continue to build new learning designs. And we realized that this sort of physically experiencing a mathematical structure and then abstracting up to 3D interactive graphs, data visualizations, and then codifying the convention is actually really scalable. It's pretty much like all of secondary math and science. So to give you a sense of what this looks like across a curriculum, in Algebra 1, for the core concepts, linear, quadratics, exponential systems, and statistics, you can really build out this VR learning design for all these concepts. So for example, for linear functions, students put their headsets on and they are in Miami. You may know this, but Miami is raising all their ground floors by 4 feet as we speak because of rising sea levels. I don't think it's going to be enough, sadly. I think they're going to have to raise it more. But what they get to do is they're on the shoreline and they meet Roy. And Roy has a clam shop and they're talking to Roy and Roy's like, I'm really worried that my clam shop may not be here in a generation for my grandkids. You then go to Antarctica, which is where you have Thwaites, Pine Island, and Fleming glaciers. Those are the 3 glaciers that are melting right now that are contributing to Miami. And you get to measure their melting. You're like, oh, this is that one's a big one, so this one's melting kind of faster. That one's a smaller one, so it's melting slower. So it's you're internalizing rate of change and multimodal associations with fractional rate of change informally. You then accept a mission. When is Miami going to have a flood risk severe enough to impact the businesses on their shoreline? Their entire team of public policy, there are many, many people working on this right now across the state of Florida. But you then, through that mission, connect that physical understanding to 3D simulations to create linear functions with your body. So you're like, oh, this one went down more, so this is a steep line. This one went down a little bit less, so the line looks like this. And then once you've kind of really internalized the structure using different movements, you then derive unit rate, so rate of change, unit rate, y-intercept, slope-intercept form, and you derive each piece of the equation through a series of interactive experiences. Quadratics, you step into the role of an urban designer and you're building a brand new green space under certain budgetary and spatial constraints that your mayor has given you of your town. Systems of equations, you're at Chicago's O'Hare Airport. Huge thunderstorm, all these flights are being rescheduled, and you're with air traffic control with Dr. Martinez, and you're trying to get all these flights safely off the runways and keep them safe in the air. A lot of our students during testing, they'd be like, Miss, airports are never going to be the same ever again. And I'm always like, good, when you're yelling at United or American, like you know everything that's going on behind the scenes to help you and your families get off the ground. And in statistics, you step into the role of a city councilwoman, and you're looking at the growth of landfills over time. So kind of, again, if I were to double stamp what kind of these spatial environments afford us, is one is that that first person story driven encounter of a real life context. So kids never ask the question again, when am I going to use this? Or where is math applicable? Or where would I, like, what's the purpose of learning? Like, that has been eradicated because they are physically being put into context. And then there's the natural way in which people learn to abstract up by going from their physicality to creating models and nomenclature and language, because as you know, language has much higher cognitive load than visualizations and kinesthetic behaviors. What happened after the NSF phase 1 is, and the phase 2 is, we found teachers across all of our sites saying, why does algebra only have this? We should be able to translate this learning design to a lot of different disciplines. And my answer was, yes, you're right. So then we got an NIH grant to take and begin R&D on what this looks like in geometry, in a more spatial subject. So geometry, we actually have, there are 6 modules, but to give you a sense of what VR design looks like for this discipline, for right angle trig, you are building a new elementary school that creates a shaded region across the playground during the hottest months of the year in India. This is a really interesting module because, it says my connection is unstable. Are you all able to still hear me?
We're good.
Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and stop my video in case that helps. So for right angle trig, you get to kind of be in the Himalayas and you see like the angle of the sun is 48 degrees. And you get to see like, for these different heights of my building, I get these different shadow legs, and you can begin to then kind of measure these ratios, and you discover the trig ratios again through these activities and through being charged with architecting this new building. For the distance formula, you're building a new cable car route in a small high altitude town in the US. For circles equations, you're in Central Asia, building low-cost yurts for nomadic and traveling communities, and you derive the equation of a circle to create your blueprints, which you're automating through these machines that are going to be building the yurts. Solids of rotation, you are in San Francisco. You may know this, but teachers can't afford to live in the city of SF because it's so expensive. So kids learn modular housing technologies that bring the cost of building down and bring the cost of rent down commensurately. And then for transformations, they are at the rooftop of an Italian family restaurant. They're trying to grow their produce more locally. So they have their arugula, their tomatoes, their apples. And they're kind of like, okay, this needs more or less sunlight. So I got to rotate it this way. I got to translate it this way before you then create a set of instructions for a fleet of gardener robots to do this fast across the city. It's a question of automation. But it's like that perennial question. It's like, why do I have to learn transformations notation? And it turns out because anything that requires algorithms and you're trying to program or automate anything, you have to be able to create the mathematical set of instructions. That's the basis of code and computer science. So kids are really able to like bring to life what these mathematical models mean and apply them in this sort of a setting. And the last thing I'll say, well, not the last thing I'll say, but on the topic of content is there, I mean, basically all of secondary math and science can be built in using the spatial design. So we've continued to do our research and build more and more interaction designs. So for example, this is one for conic sections where you are experiencing, you're at the Whispering Gallery in Grand Central Station in the city of New York. And you may know this if you've been there, but the ceiling is elliptical. So if you stand at the focal points, you can hear anybody speaking or clapping crystal clear. But if you move away from the focal point, you can't. And kids discover that and they like never forget it. Like, oh my God, like when I was here, I couldn't hear it as well. And then when I moved over, I was able to hear it perfectly. And you're able to kind of visualize that it's at the two focal points that all the sound paths hit you at the same exact time. And then you're able to use hand models to really kind of begin to model this out. And then you use a variety of visualizations and tools to derive the equation of an ellipse. And when we were doing our research with kids on the advanced algebra concepts, they were just like, Miss, we used to just straight up memorize these equations. We had no idea where they're coming from. We had no idea where they were applied. So I would argue that although Algebra 1 and the middle school math designs have been most proliferated because of the number of kids that struggle in middle school and don't even get past middle school in Algebra 1 effectively, our kids that are getting to advanced algebra, there's a disengagement and a boredom and a lack of utility or purpose that really begins to set into the math classroom that kind of we've seen huge impact in. And so just kind of continue to give you examples of numerous topics that kids have worked on. To give you a sense of where our research kind of ended up taking us is we really focused on middle school math, Algebra 1, geometry, and Algebra 2 pre-calculus. That's the grades 7 to 11 math. But then when we put it out, we had a clamoring from science teachers saying a lot of what you've done in math can absolutely be applied to science. So in this coming year, we're going to be doing our pilot research with our first physics, chemistry, and biology learning libraries. And to give you a sense of what these look like, to learn Faraday's law, for example, you're using tributaries across the Midwest to create hydropower systems that store solar energy at night. That's one of the main reasons why solar panels are inefficient. For electromolecular forces in chemistry, you are a founding engineer at Intel in the 1970s. You may know that the microprocessor was invented in 1971. And now it's really obvious that you use semiconductors and silicon. But at that time, there was a huge kind of like tech revolution trying to figure out what materials can we use to build these computing components. And so they discovered through a variety of, through exploring electron configurations and atomic structure, they discovered that silicon is indeed the best semiconductor and what to use to build our modern computers. And then biology is all things kind of like CRISPR and mRNA vaccines, and really putting kids in the seat of practitioners who are working on cutting edge methodologies in each of these disciplines. So in terms of like what you should understand on, and now I'm going to kind of move into our early research studies, which were all in the state of Ohio. Ohio was our pioneer state. We had all of our first districts who adopted were in the state of Ohio. And that's why I have tremendous, tremendous affection and love. I had a crazy morning. And if it was anybody else, I would have canceled. But because it's you and because it's Ohio, I was like, I have to be here. You all were pioneers in adopting this new way of thinking and learning. So first of all, thank you. But before we get into what the studies looked like across your districts, I want to share and make sure you understand what the classroom implementation looks like, because everything I've shared with you thus far is student-facing VR content. This is students in headsets working through a problem at their own pace, gaining understanding and fluency of a core mathematical idea. The teachers are not in headset with kids. The learning model goes as such. Kids are in headset, 30 to 35 kids in a classroom. Teacher has a real-time web-based dashboard. She is using that dashboard to monitor and provide feedback, because now the role of a teacher with such powerful technology is now she can really be the expert on kids. She is watching, she's seeing exactly where every kid is. She's able to focus on her 4 or 5 students who need most help. She knows who they are emotionally. She knows who they are academically, and she's able to provide just-in-time feedback. So that teacher dashboard is web-based because to maintain the physical safety of a classroom, a teacher cannot put a VR headset on. And then we have really robust like wraparound lesson guides and toolkits that we've been co-designing with teachers that really show a teacher how do you lessonize VR. And when I say lessonize, I mean, how do you do the prereq checks? How do you frame the day before they put the headsets on? What misconceptions are you looking for on your dashboard? And what are the high quality questions you're using to help kids at critical moments of struggle? When the kids put the headsets down, how do you externalize key thinking and then converge at the front of the room the key vocabulary, notation, and procedures? It's an art. It's basically problem-based methodologies using virtual reality. And so we've really created the apparatus for the lesson guides, the lesson slides, the preparation checklists, and that's what's allowed us to kind of get this to as many kids and students and teachers as possible, has been this emphasis on the wraparound teacher aids that they use to prepare. And then the last thing I'll say on this, before we move on to kind of get into research, is that we've found that our teacher are our greatest advocates. They are the ones who are actually on the ground, like leading this revolution. I've been all across Texas this week and kind of sharing this with teachers across the state. And every teacher, it's like a refrain because we're across 27 states now in just a year. Every teacher puts their hands up and says, we have been waiting for something like this our entire life. It never came. We kept being told to do discourse. We kept told to do rich, questioning, and yet the textbooks and the tools in front of us were not amenable to that pedagogy. And so I say all that because the PD and the ongoing support is just table stakes for a new technology. So we've been very categorical about the onboarding institutes and making sure teachers are able to kind of run the entire instructional arc in our care, from doing the modules to using the dashboard to learning how to use the problem-based discussion lesson guides, and really kind of gaining the muscle memories of facilitating VR in the classroom. I do want to share this video. This was during our NSF phase 1 research. These were the first kids in the United States to ever get into a VR math learning design. And since then, we've worked across hundreds of thousands of kids now. And there's something really special about what the first children who had gotten in and what they shared about their reaction to math. And so I wanted to kind of make sure that we hear from them. I don't know, my internet is really poor, so I don't know if the video is going to actually play. Okay. Oh, can you all see?
Yes.
Okay.
Be ready to have your world, a little bit more of your world change than you're normally used to. Oh, look at that virus. What happens if I touch it? Help your lab city, go.
It was so exciting. While I was in there, it was so realistic. I was able to visualize and to interact with things that I normally wouldn't interact with in class.
Within the span of 3 weeks, a lot less people have gotten infected by now.
Week 1, week 2, week 3, and week 4.
One of these people had infected 5 different people.
While I was in the module, it was so easy to understand.
I'm not the best math student, but I don't really like the fact that when I do math problems, I don't know the reason why I'm doing it, and I can't really apply it because it's just what am I supposed to use it for? But now knowing that when you connect the virus with math, it makes me know oh, this is what I want to do. This math is applicable to the real world, and it makes me want to do more math as well.
In regular math, you can only learn it one way. You learn without getting a visual connection. But with this, you actually get a physical representation of how this number affects this certain populace.
Learning this way is really good because we have to put critical thinking a lot. Even if we don't really feel it in class, sometimes we just sit and read this question and try to answer it. We actually have the opportunity to visualize it and play with it the way that we can understand it better ourselves.
So what's been really interesting here is if you look at that video, I'll turn my video on for just a moment again. It looked like kids have a lot of space. And so I want to kind of share what I'm seeing in terms of the teacher facilitation. It's been built such that you don't need a lot of space. As long as like kids have upper body movement, that's sufficient, because we have something called teleportation. In VR, you can teleport, which means you can move yourself without moving your legs. And as long as you still have that tactile feeling, you have some of those important kinesthetic experiences. And so I want you to kind of get a look at what we're seeing. A lot of these actually were in your, oh, you know what? I would like to show you that, because I think it's been an important thing we've learned through working with so many schools, and it'll give you a good look. Give me just one moment. I'm gonna pull it up. And okay, let's see. Systems overview. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen one more time. Thank you for bearing. And so if you look at this, you will see all kinds of ways in which as I've been traveling and watching how different school systems are using. You have days that teachers, and the first one was in Ohio, you have days where teachers will take the students out and they're in a media center, they're in a library, they'll open the doors so that they want kids to have that space. We also are seeing tons of classroom implementations where students are just at their desk. And again, as long as they have the movement, this is yet again an example where the teacher took them out in a hallway. And then this is where the teacher kind of put those desks together in the middle. And so then the kids were able to like look outside and to have like sufficient movement. Okay, and now that I'm actually here, I did want to show you one more piece. This all came out with our co-design with Montgomery County and Butler County this past year. But we took a ton of teacher feedback to build the kind of the teacher apparatus of what the teacher needs to successfully use this. And so this is what the teacher dashboard looks like. The teacher gets to see on average where their kids are, which kids need their help are always at the top. A lot of our teachers shared throughout our work that there are two ways that we like to give feedback. One, of course, kids have a virtual watch in VR. So the teacher's always able to send messages and communicate. So when the teacher sends a message, the virtual watch begins to buzz and like kids cannot ignore it. And when a student then reads the message, the teacher gets a red receipt. The teacher also can walk up to the child and have a really quick dialogue with them. Like, hey, Pete, I'm watching you on the dashboard. You've been on this table forever. What's going on, friend? And you can have a very quick dialogue with them. And that's the fun thing about VR is that you can go and talk to them because they're co-located, or you can communicate with them through the dashboard. And then of course you want to have the same data reporting systems that you would for any other tool. And so that's an infrastructure that had to get built out, which is after kids are done, teachers can go back and always see see the formative assessments and where every student landed. So, I don't know what's happened, but I'm gonna now kind of go back to the previous deck. I wanted to make sure you could see, you had a little bit of a visualization. And so in the last 10 minutes I have before, I would actually really like to open up for your reactions and thoughts and questions as you got a really quick deep dive around this learning design. The first study we did in Ohio was across 4 districts, and across it was about, this is a little bit lower, it's about 200 students in 15 classes. And the study objective was to really test the feasibility of implementing this sort of a math design in any classrooms. It was a very simple study. We had pre-tests and pre-surveys. Students did 1 full module and the conceptual offline work to make sure they could do all the math they did in VR on paper pencil. And then there was a post-test and survey. And just to give you a snapshot of the results, more than 80% of students felt that the VR lessons had helped them deeply understand the math. Over that 1 week, student achievement increased by, it was about 11%. And then there was an 18% increase in students saying that they felt more confident, that they could understand and access. What was interesting though was, and I pulled one quote from one of the high school math teachers that participated in the study, was many teachers wrote this. They're like, this topic typically takes us 3 weeks to teach, 4 weeks to teach. And they just got it in one. There was one teacher who wrote in the post survey that, once kids saw it, they couldn't unsee it. Once they saw those groups of 5 getting built, and it was so visceral, they couldn't shake that. It was such a sticky takeaway. And so the feasibility study led to another study across 10 districts in the state called the implementation study. That was also a kind of a similar number of students, but this was a different set of districts. And this was much more flexible. Teachers were able to implement any modules of their choosing. They made decisions about where they integrated. We had multiple kind of retrospective surveys for both the teacher and the student, and there were lots of classroom observations and debriefs. And one of the things, and in terms of like kind of the key things that came out of the implementation study, was we were seeing it getting implemented in a variety of places in the unit. So we had some teachers that were using it at the beginning. We had some teachers who were using it in the middle. We had some teachers that said, no, I really like it as a coagulant at the end that just brings it all together. We saw a multitude of inclusion, RTI tier 1, tier 2. So it was just really interesting and fun to see the very flexible application of a very simple task-based model. And we saw pretty amazing data on the utility. So, about 90% of kids now saying math class is important, which is interesting because, again, utility is always in question in secondary math of where am I ever going to use this? And then there was a really significant increase in just confidence. Like, I believe that I can learn this now because of the level of agency that they had. The big study going on in Ohio right now is across 36 school districts. It's been throughout this entire kind of academic year. And this is intended to validate the empirical impact on conceptual learning, mindset, and engagement. That white paper, I was telling Michelle, unfortunately, it was supposed to be coming out later this month, but it will be coming out in April, and I'll be excited to share that with you as given the size of the study. But that the RCT is really kind of, and I'll read these out, is really kind of specifically looking at how does the use of this methodology really impact different learner types, specifically as it pertains to perseverance, i.e. when they get stuck on a difficult math problem, what do they do? What are the different sense-making affordances that because they now have, they keep going, as well as their mindset and the identity that they have in a math classroom. Really getting underneath, can this sort of a learning design truly accelerate learning in algebra for underserved communities because of Algebra 1's role and it being just a key predictor of success? We are looking at both Algebra 1 and grade 7. Those are the two big drop-off rates. And then the third is year 1 of college. That's when you get the next huge kind of like leak in the pipeline. And then like, what is the impact of using it as a supplemental resource? Because this is not intended in any way. VR should never try to kind of take over a core. VR is there for these key moments of the unit to drive ambition and purpose and conviction to want to learn this and to have a very, very clear visualization of the mathematics that you're learning. But beyond that, it's just there to augment. It's not there to replace everything else that you have in the curriculum. And then really looking at for teachers, understanding for them how they perceive the greatest impact on their kids. How is the relationship between teachers and students changing? I saw this in both Springfield, Mass, as well as a number of my districts in Ohio, where a lot of the teachers were telling us that, I've been the conduit for the subject matter that my kids hate. And as a result, it greatly impacted the relationship I had with them because they saw me as the deliverer of this thing that they're not good at this thing that is not real, and it's not all around the world when they walk out of the classroom. So their perception of me was really negative. And what started to happen, and this when it first started to happen in Springfield, Massachusetts, I then began to collect that information across districts, and it was just vastly improving how students viewed their math teacher and how they viewed the math class. And then this actually first came up in Montgomery County. We had a teacher who said, Anarupa, we didn't leave the field of teaching this year. I didn't leave the field of teaching this year because I got to use something like Prisms. And as I talked to this teacher more, I asked her why. And she says, well, I felt like I was being invested in. I felt like I was being upskilled. I felt like I was learning bleeding edge technologies. So I really wanted to kind of learn more about this at scale from teachers across the state around how does it really impact how they show up to work? How does it make them feel like they are extremely valued because they have top-notch technology on in their hands? They have really high quality lesson materials that help them lessonize and use it, knowing that, you know, my entire team, we taught bell to bell. I was in the largest district in the US. I taught a class with 60 kids in it. Like, I've like seen it all. And so when I thought about the lesson guides, the templates, and the teacher prep materials, it has to be so system proof, because we almost have no idea what sort of like craziness the teacher is going to be put in. And I think that that's something we wanted to kind of understand more. So I want to be mindful of the time. It's, well, for me, it's 10:31. I believe for you all, it's 11:31. I want to stop sharing. I like flew through a bunch of content with the hope that you all would kind of resonate with different things, and we could actually spend the last 10 minutes with questions from you all on the learning design, what we've learned from teachers, the different studies that are happening. I've kind of front-ended with the hardware itself and specifics around why this hardware is different and why this hardware will allow us to use natural interfaces. So anything on any of those topics, I'm happy to jump into. I think we have actually 15 minutes, which is great, because the purpose is to really interact and hear from you all.
Thank you. Can the teachers actually make something from the Prism? Can they make their own lesson plans?
That's an excellent question. In these early stages of our R&D, we've been creating the content modules, and what teachers are able to do is they're able to launch the modules from the dashboard, but right now they can't create them themselves. What they're able to do though is they're able to create lesson questions and guides after the kids come out. So teachers have been really innovating upon, like, after kids have had this experience, what are all the things that we can talk about and do that we couldn't do before? And so most of the innovation has not been teachers creating VR lessons, but them creating discussion frameworks and follow-on problems after kids get out.
Thank you. I know the issue of girls and spatial reasoning is not natural, according to Lambert, and I know it's a problem for me, but that idea that we do have research that says it can be taught. So this is a wonderful, wonderful help to help let girls not be held back by that idea of rotation and spatial sense.
I'm really glad that you said that. So one of the things, so I'm a woman CEO, and one of the things that I've gotten a lot of pushback on is like, other women have told me, why are you going out and saying that women are worse at spatial reasoning? I'm like, because it's true. It's
research. There's research out there.
It's research. Women are categorically worse at spatial reasoning, and spatial reasoning is the #1 indicator of success in STEM. So if we want to be intellectually honest in this room and we are interested in solving the problem, we have to say that, and then we have to help them get better. There was a really amazing female math professor at Harvard, which she was in Cambridge when I was there. She was excellent. She discerned this. She saw this categorical difference between her male students and her female students. So she started to build out tons of spatial reasoning activities. And these are women who are like 18, 19 years old. And she started to find that even at the age of 18, 19, 20, you can fill the gap. Now, the problem with paper resources, Janet, is that they're just a little bit more ineffective. And so VR basically accelerates the process. And it goes back to what we found in the feasibility study, where teachers were like, things that took me 4 weeks to do, I was able to do it in 1. So it's not to say that there aren't paper resources where you can maybe build spatial reasoning over time. I'm sure there are, but VR is an accelerant because it does everything way faster and way better.
Nice to know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really well studied. And now that there are all these AI models that are out, like people have been like kind of searching for all kinds of research, and one that keeps coming up over and over again. So both Black and brown students and female students are much worse at spatial reasoning. And, you know, this is not a deficit. It's the truth. You know, let's go out and fix it.
And we're better at language than men are. So, you know, they have help with language arts. So yeah, I think this is fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Would love more questions. And look, we are at the beginning of modulating this medium together. And so much of what this looks like came from your districts in Ohio. I was literally in classrooms watching. I was co-designing with your teacher. I was watching How do kids react? What do teachers need? And so as you share your feedback, just know you are pioneers, and things you say and do now will have profound impact on how the thing gets built. In 5 years, I won't say the same thing. Much of this will be built out by that time. So you will not have the same power and role to modulate it, but now you do. So we're actually holding a big event in Ohio on March 1st, and we're inviting all of our superintendents, teachers, curriculum leaders who've been using, and we're gonna be doing panels to hear from their experiences. We'll be doing tons of VR demos so people can be exposed. What is this? Anarupa, what do you mean by learning math in VR? So if you're in Columbus, Ohio on March 1, we would be honored to have you as a guest, for you to come in and kind of learn from and get into these and see what it's like in there.
How does the teacher apply to that?
The March 1 event?
Correct.
I will send the flyer to Michelle, and you just RSVP.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we're gonna have tons and tons of headsets there, so people can come in, they can get in, they can see what it looks like. What is the methodology to go from a physical experience to go to tactile manipulatives, where you begin to see a structure, and then from that structure you begin to discern patterns and name it. Because at the end, we get to the formal vocabulary, we get to the formal procedure, but I want people to kind of live through it piece to piece to piece, and then teachers have that light bulb, like, okay, like I finally get it.
A question is the spectrum of special needs students. How well do they respond to this? And I'm thinking, some cases there's some mental deficiency, some cases it's behavioral, emotional.
I'm so glad that you named that. This has actually been most impactful for students with IEPs. I don't want to speak before the RCT comes out, because that's going to be obviously the most accurate narration of the outcomes. But for example, we're in Gwinnett County, which is a very large district in Georgia. And my coaches, they were in a class with lots of autistic kids, and she was like, they are loving it, they're laughing, they are feeling like the multimodal sense making, the ability to look at something in all these different ways. We've now taken a very narrow way to perform in mathematics, i.e. writing and visuals, diagrams. We've now said there's all these other representations of thought. We're now saying that rate of change is not y2 minus y1 over x1, x2 minus x1. We're saying rate of change is, oh, this is a high rate, this is a low rate. I went the same to the right, but I went down more and down less. That's a new way of representing a thought. And so what we're finding is our students with IEPs, exceptionalities that need to kind of move around a bit more. They can't get stuck with words and a ton of language from the beginning. They have to sense make in a different way. One of our first districts that we started working with was also Cherokee County. Dr. Catherine Head, the head of math there, she was like, this is actually working the best with my students with exceptionalities, because they're talking a lot more. What was happening before in math classes, they had less schema and they had less experiences to talk about. It would be like, how did you solve the equation? That's not a very rich discussion, right? But now they're able to talk about what they saw, what they touched, what they felt, what they emotionally experienced in that story. There's so much to talk about. So she was like, Anarupa, it's the opposite problem now. We can't get them to stop talking about the VR experience. So I would say the two biggest impacts we've seen, one is on discourse. Students with IEPs are talking and sharing their thinking and are a lot more confident in sharing their thinking because they were able to sense make in a lot of different ways. And then the second thing that we're seeing is a lot of our kids who have IEPs, there's a lot of trauma with math. And what they've told us time and time again is we feel safe. We feel like we're like focused in there. We feel like no one's watching, none of our peers are watching us. And so we're in a lot of alternative high schools with kids with really severe learning disabilities. And those kids are just thriving because they're like, I can focus. I don't feel peer pressure. I don't feel dumb. There's a lot of safety in immersive VR. And so I would say those are the two biggest things we're finding: focus, feeling safe for kids who have been very vulnerable in a social setting in the past. And then the multimodal sense making has afforded a lot more discussion and observations from our students with IEPs. You all are frozen. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Did that answer your question, or were there other things you were thinking about when you thought about specific affordances on the IEP?
No, that covers it very well. Thank you.
No, thank you.
I used to teach a Title I math class at a vocational high school, and it would take 3 months to get those kids to trust what we were doing in mathematics. And it was very basic. So this idea that you could do 1 week of something, get them excited, it's just overwhelming. What a time saver.
And
Yeah.
I'll toss in that if any of you are in or near Southwest Ohio, Butler County ESC does have, I think we have 1 or 2 classroom sets of the VR headsets. And I've spent some time sharing, modeling with superintendents and curriculum directors. And just when I work with teachers, I'll sometimes bring my headset with me and we'll kind of model and let folks experience. So if you're in Southwest Ohio and want to give it a try, let me know and I'll see if I can meet up with you at Butler County ESC if that March 1st event does not fit into your schedule.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
I'm hoping a lot of my graduates worked with you.
And I Lydia, I don't know where you are here, but I wanted to tell you wherever you are, I'm also really excited about the science. I think the science is going to be game changing because typically in science, the focus has been labs. It's been simulations, it's been experiments versus it's the same pedagogy here where you experience real world problems and you're focused on deep conceptual understanding versus just doing lab simulation. So it's again, like a different focus. And so we're excited to get this out to all of your kids and hear how they react to it.
Right. We are really trying to focus around phenomena-driven instruction here in Ohio. I'm actually with the Department of Education. And, you know, there are certain phenomena that kids cannot experience firsthand. So this is a great avenue for that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really interesting that you say that. Like, for example, for Lenz's law in physics, kids are looking at a high-speed train, like a braking system, and you can't see all those electromagnetic forces. So they're actually able to see the entire electromagnetic braking system. And the kids take and you're fully immersed. It's not AR. You're like in it. And they took the headset off and they're like, I'm never going to forget that ever. They will forever remember the right-hand rule and the electric field and the magnetic field because it's just kind of, it like pierced through their heart. And so that's what we really try to do is give them such visceral visualizations in the context of a problem that they care about, because the visualization by itself won't matter. You got to care about what you're learning, hence that emotional connection at the beginning of why do you care? And to be a child that is discerning in the world of like adults, stop putting problems in front of me where I don't know why I need to learn it. Like that's not a very good thing to instill in our children. Like just learn stuff for the sake of it. No, go out and learn things so you can go be an agent of change. And I think that that's what really kind of gets our kids super pumped. And science and math are the frameworks for building the world. I mean, that's the entire world of engineering is based on science and math. And yet they're just kind of looking at math as such a kind of non-utilitarian. And science, I think, is a little bit better than math. It always has been because of the some of the real world applications and labs that exist today. But I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you kind of pulled out that we're going to kind of get this across all of math and science at a depth. And whomever had asked about the content, we're going to keep building more modules. What we're finding in a lot of our schools is that even though headsets cannot be used, the age requirement is age 12, which is why we stuck to middle school and high school topics. There are lots of elementary school topics that are kind of precluding them from being successful. So numbers in base 10, integer operations, fractions operations. So we're actually going to be building out a lot of the elementary concepts as well for our middle school students.
Anarupa, I have to tell you, I was very engaged in your presentation, and my grandkids, each set of them had a headset, and I've tried it, and it is amazing. So that for those of you who have never done anything like it's just something, you know, when I went to school, I used a slide rule. So when you think about a slide rule to virtual reality, I mean, it is amazing. It is just amazing. I so appreciate the conversation. I really look forward to seeing what you do in the future. Perhaps when you do some things with science, you can come back and report on your study for math. And I know you're very busy and you've squeezed us in, and we really appreciate it.
I'm so sorry. I didn't want to give that feeling at all. Oh, you got Ohio. I will say it again because I think gratitude like keeps me alive. But I am so grateful to the state of Ohio. You don't know. When I first started, people thought I was crazy. And I'm not going to get emotional here. I think it's being recorded. Like, people thought I was crazy. They were like, what is she talking about? There are no headsets in schools. How is she going to do VR for math and science? It's a gaming tool. And there were leaders like Michelle's team and Candace and Shannon Cox. And they were like, I see what she's doing. And those were all leaders in the state of Ohio. And you guys took a bet with me and you helped me do the research, because that's what it is. We have to make sure it's efficacious. And we started to study it. We started to build it together. We started to get it across. We're across 55 districts in the state of Ohio, almost 60 actually. And it just started to grow like fire across the state because of what you said. Kids put the headsets on and they were transported, and they left the walls of the classroom and they got to feel joy and elation. Marlon Stiles, who's the superintendent in Middletown, I know he's transitioning, but he said that, you know, Anarupa, I never had kids running around my district saying, I love Algebra 1 ever, you know? So it's like, you know, that's a big thing to say, for people to run around saying like, I love this discipline versus I'm good at it or I'm successful at it. I think that I was a product of a generation of that. Everybody's like, oh, I'm like good at math. But you know what? It's not enough to be good at math. Like, that's just simply not enough. You have to love it. You have to want to do something of value with it. And so, thank you for seeing. I'm so glad you put a headset on. They're incredible. And you just wait to see where the tech goes. I mean, this is just the beginning. And this is why it's such an exciting time to be alive. I tell my team every day, you should be grateful to be alive today, because just watch where education goes because of this new technology that's now existing. Like, I was a teacher for a long time. I have a tech background. The modern laptop never inspired me to become to build ed tech. I was like, this is not inspiring to me. But then when VR came out, I was like, let's go. This is something to be built. So anyway, I know that I've overstayed my welcome. I'm a bit over, but Sue, I will send that March event if you want to come in, get into headsets, learn more from teachers across the state who have been using. You will get science pushed all your headsets in July. So that'll be out in school soon. And then once the RCT study publishes, I will be sure to share that with you, Michelle, if you'd like to share that with the group so people can read the results that came out of it.
Thank you so much for sharing your passion with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.